Hi, I'm Adam in Wales and this is my board gaming vlog, and the most recent game that I've purchased is this one, Quadropolis. Now this is a tile laying game, and the first game I ever bought once I got into this modern gaming hobby was Carcassonne, which is also a tile laying game. But it wasn't the first tile laying game I'd ever played, because as a teenager I was playing a lot of Dungeon Quest. And when you look at the three games, although they all fit into that tile laying genre, they're very different games. So this video is going to look at my top 10 different mechanisms that are used in tile laying games. Now, there's lots of different approaches that I could take to categorising tile laying games. We could look at, are we working on a shared board, or are we working on our own individual tableau of tiles in front of us? We could look at, how do we get the tiles? Are they randomly drawn? Are they taken from a bag? Are they just grabbed from the middle in a real-time fashion? Or are they part of some sort of central marketplace? We could look at, how do the tiles activate when they're used? Do they give us actions when we place the tile, or do they give us actions when we put something onto the tile, or do they give us actions when a tile is placed adjacent to them? All of these would be sensible ways to categorise a tile laying game, but I'm going to go for something a little bit looser. So number one on the list is real-time tile laying games. Now, real-time tile laying games are not my favourite genre, that's why they're number 10, and I must admit I couldn't think of more than 10 genres of tile laying games. So we're talking here about games like Galaxy Trucker. Galaxy Trucker is probably the one of these games that I've got the most experience of. I like half the game, the first half. I don't enjoy the second half that much. So I like building the machine, which is all done instantly, grabbing tiles, racing the other players to build your machine better than theirs, build your spaceship, and then when the time runs out, we move on to the second part, which is essentially a random card draw, and see how your spaceship holds up against the different problems that come out of that deck. Basically, watch your spaceship fall apart. I'm not so keen on that bit. It seems a bit long, it's very, very random, but I do like that puzzly spatial aspect of building the ship in the first place. Other games I'd like to try out, Mondo, I believe this has a similar timed building a map of the world and trying to score points, and also Factory Fun. I'm not sure this has quite the scope of those two games in terms of, you know, it's the fastest to grab from a small selection of tiles in Factory Fun, unlike the massive number of tiles that you get in Galaxy Trucker or Mondo, but all real-time tile laying games. Number 9 on my list is about route building, building a series of roads, a way to travel around the board or around the table. So my example here is the game Sheep and Thief, which is a little, I believe it's Japanese, I'm not quite sure about that, but it's a drafting game where you draft cards, which are essentially used as tiles, to build a network of roads and move sheep around these roads into scoring positions. It's a great little game, but other examples of this sort of genre of tile laying games are things like Steam, and a lot of the railway train games have networks of rails that go around the board. The 18xx games like 1830. And then on the other end of the spectrum, really simple games like Tsuro and Tsuro of the Seas are about creating a network of roads and then travelling your pawn down those roads. One of the current Spiel des Jahres award nominees is Karuba from Haba Games, and Karuba is very much that it's placing tiles into an individual sort of little tableau and trying to create a route to get explorers into little temples and gather gems along the way. So this is my number 9, travel and sort of network and route building. Number 8 on my list is about destruction. Tile laying seems to lend itself very well to natural disasters, and so we see games like The Downfall of Pompeii and also the game Eruption, where we lay tiles representing lava running around and destroying things. So rather than building, we're actually taking things apart. Survive, Escape from Atlantis from Stronghold Games actually takes this one step further, and here we have a board that has all these lovely tiles laid out, and we're taking them off the board, creating a sort of sinking island and dropping the meeples into the sea and trying to save them with little boats. So tile laying is not always a constructive thing. Sometimes it's quite the opposite. Sometimes it's quite an aggressive, destructive activity. Number 7 is a totally different sort of idea to the previous entry, and this is about a sort of having a living board, having tiles that move around or stack throughout the game to create a different sort of environment in which to work that's constantly adapting to the player's play. A great example would be Forbidden Desert, Matt Leacock's cooperative game, where sands blow over the tiles and move around, and you have to uncover them, dig them out from under the tiles, and the tiles themselves move around the board with the shifting of the wind and of time. A much more complex, much more competitive example would be Dominant Species, where we have an enormous board representing the world and all different landscapes within it. There's a great degree of exploration in this, which we're going to come on to, but there's also an oncoming sort of ice age where tundra and these big glaciers move across the landscape, and you have to adapt and move your animals, your tokens around the board to get them onto more sort of hospitable areas. I've already mentioned a sort of living board. Sometimes, though, we're simply exploring a board. Things aren't going to change, particularly once stuff is laid out there, but we're going to turn over new tiles and see what's there. I'm thinking of games like, Dungeon Quest would be a classic example, where we build this sort of catacombs on a board, the old originally Games Workshop, now Fantasy Flight game. But within the Eurogame genre, there are games like this too. Perhaps the most notable example is Tikal, where we're exploring a sort of jungle and we're turning over these temples. Java, another game in the same series of games. This one has really nice thick tiles that stack on top of each other and create hills and a really sort of three-dimensional landscape that you can then occupy, and then a great degree of area majority as we try to claim the highest sort of point scoring areas of the board. Number 5, I'm calling pure tile-laying games, but I could equally call them abstract tile-laying games. This is where there is no board and there is no real theme, although there may be some nominal theme and a bit of graphics in there. Your classic game on this particular slot is the game Quirkle, which is a bit like Scrabble, but we're laying out tiles with different shapes and different colours and trying to connect up rows of either matching shape or colour and then score those individual rows. We can add on to existing rows as we can in Scrabble, and we gradually build up this tableau of shapes and colours throughout the game. Very simple, very accessible game, tile laying at its absolute purest. A more complex sort of version of the same idea would be something like Voluspa, which introduces this sort of Norse mythology artwork which has nothing to do with the game, but each individual type of tile that's added to this sort of network, this tableau, each tile has a special ability, and it might partner with another tile, or it might affect another tile in a certain way and change the scoring. But essentially this is like Quirkle advanced, I would say. And then we have games like Mops Royal. Now this is an ultra simple game from the German company Norris. Very, very simple, and it's about creating little sets of colours, matching colours and symbols again, this time working on your own individual tableau. In fact, it works very similarly to the game Karuba that I mentioned earlier, which is nominated for the Spiel des Jahres. In Mops Royal, both players are given the same tile at the same time. It's just that they may choose to do something different with it. And as a result, they may end up going down a similar route, or they may go somewhere completely different, and then it's who does the best when everyone's given the same randomly chosen tile. We just talked about the game Quirkle and its similarities to Scrabble. This entry into the list brings Scrabble into the picture. So here we have the classic word-building game. This is a tile-laying game played on a board. And what you find with a lot of these tile-laying games played on boards is that it's all about getting your tile onto the space on the board that gives you the highest scoring opportunities. So a game like Scrabble does that with its double letter scores and those sort of bonuses. Other games will be about how do you locate your tiles in proximity to what other players have done. So at the more complex end of the spectrum, the classic Euro game from Reiner Knizia, Tigris and Euphrates, a masterpiece of a game where we're building up tiles in Mesopotamia in 3000 BC, representing a civilization in a very loose sense. It's essentially an abstract, but a very aggressive, fairly complex game with a lot of depth, as opposed to Scrabble, which is that old family favourite. A simpler game, perhaps one which people won't have heard of so much, is Bangkok Klongs from DLP Games. It's got this lovely Clemens Franz artwork of these little klongs carrying fruit and various goods. It's an abstract game where we're placing these boats onto the water and trying to get them into positions where we can score the most points. Lovely, lovely game, really overlooked. And now we're on to the game that started us off with this list, and that's this new Days of Wonder title, Quadropolis, where I build an individual tableau and I activate my tiles in order to generate points. They're activated by placing other tiles adjacent to them. Most commonly, that's the way that we score points. So in a way, that's similar to games like Suburbia and the Castles of Mad King Ludwig, which have a slightly more complex version of that set of events. Now, an earlier game, and in fact the first game that introduced me to this idea of an individual tableau and activation by placing tiles adjacent, is the game Glen More, which hopefully will be coming back at some point soon. Matthias Kramer made this game several years ago. It's not a grand looking game, but it's a beautiful Euro in terms of its gameplay. We're placing tiles, generating resources from those tiles, spending those resources to gain more tiles. It's got an ingenious little central marketplace and economics. If you enjoy things like Suburbia and Castles of Mad King Ludwig, this is absolutely your next step. It's the same genre, it's the same feel, but it's got this lovely, rich sort of theme and engine building in it, in that classic Euro style. And you knew it was coming. The number 2 on my list is shared tableau building, where we lay out tiles and we share a communal pool to build a sort of map, and then we place things onto that map in order to activate the tiles. In Carcassonne, that means that we're scoring the tiles by placing little workers on roads or on cities. It's a brilliant game in all its forms. Sometimes I like South Seas, sometimes I like Carcassonne itself. I have the 2-player version, the Castle, which opens up a whole load of new strategic options, this one being by Reiner Knizia. It's a world of games in its own right. If you owned a load of Carcassonne games, that would give you a lot of variety, actually, because the game's quite different in some ways. But there are other games that do similar things, one of them being Oregon. Oregon is this one is played on a board, but again, we share that board and we place tiles on it. We place meeples, little cowboy type meeples onto the board, and then we activate those tiles as a result. Now, getting rid of all these games and looking at it in a slightly wider lens, we have games like Takenoko. Takenoko is a beautiful game where players build a garden and the garden grows bamboo as we move the gardener onto the pieces, and the panda moves around the pieces and eats the bamboo. And so this map, it grows, but all players are sharing the same map and trying to achieve different goals by activating the tiles. And for those of you that were surprised to find that Carcassonne and that shared tableau building are not number 1 in my list of tile laying mechanisms, this is the reason why. Who doesn't love a bit of tessellation? Tessellation is the absolute epitome of the tile-laying genre. We're talking in its most classic, sort of purest form of the game Blokus, but that has been integrated into other games, not often enough. So we have sublime games like Die Baumeister von Arcadia from Rudiger Dorn, where we lay out these sort of Tetris-style pieces and in order to claim territory in a real sort of that old-fashioned sort of Euro style. but also, again, in quite an old Euro game now, the Princes of Florence. Amongst all the auctions and the economic stuff and the objective building, all that stuff that's going on, we have tessellation of tiles, trying to fit them into our sort of space on the board in the most appropriate way, and these Tetris-shaped pieces. But perhaps the epitome of this genre, and a little bit of a sort of poster child of the two-player small box games, is Patchwork. Uwe Rosenberg's other classic, alongside his magnum opus Agricola. Patchwork is beautiful and accessible and plays in a short duration. It's ideal for two players. It's got this lovely sort of quilting theme where we're placing bits of Tetris-shaped cloth and scoring buttons. Wonderful, wonderful use of that Tetris sort of mechanism of tessellating tiles. And that brings us to the end of my top 10 mechanisms for tile laying games. Of course, some of these have overlapped. You'll see some of those games that I've mentioned could have fitted into multiple different categories. But it's interesting to look at the broad sort of ways in which a single mechanism can be used. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you like this video, please watch some of my others or subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm Adam in Wales on Twitter. I'm at Boardgame Wales, and on Boardgame Geek I'm Adam78. I hope you'll watch more of my videos in the future. Thank you very much for watching. All the best.